It's always nice to see you and to be able to see who you're talking to.
Okay. Right, we've got a few people in here. I'll just let Robin in.
Oh, you have
Do-do.
to give people access.
No, I don't. I think they can come straight in. Hi, everybody that's here so far. So we normally give it just to about 3 minutes past before we sort of make a start, just to allow people. We all know that feeling, don't we, when your phone pings, you're like, oh gosh, I'm supposed to be on that thing, aren't I?
Yeah.
I'm like the worst for that. What I'm also going to do is people share the invite, copy meeting link. I'm just going to put this into the WhatsApp group, just in case there's anybody who wants to join on there too. So today we're going to be talking all about social media, how you can encourage your consultants to use, some tips and hints which aren't necessarily just for consultants, can be used by anybody, around like how you can find content, what good strategies are, what does that look like, how you can overcome resistance from people as well. We're going to be touching on as well. Right, let me just put this into the group. I promise it isn't death by PowerPoint. So anybody, hopefully most of you will have been on one of our webinars before. So we like to keep it quite sort of informal. It's kind of geared around me interviewing or discussing the kind of topic with our guest, who this week is Kieran from Pager. And we'll come on and just kind of introduce ourselves properly. Let's make a start. So I am Katie. I'm a fractional marketing director. Been working in marketing for over 20 years, specialising in recruitment now for about 8 years. I work with lots of recruitment companies from all different kind of sectors, size, and we do everything from kind of coaching right through to like an in-house outsourced full marketing team for people. And I'm joined today. Thank you, Kieran. And I should explain, Kieran, because I feel like that Darren, your MD, is it your MD?
Yes.
Yeah, was due to be on with me today, and is sick, has lost his voice completely, and
He's pulled a sickie at the last minute, parachuted me in.
But to be fair, Kieran, I've been trying to hook you down and get you on one of these webinars for ages. So I feel like that this is like karma a little bit, that it's come around.
I'd agree for the lack of response to the invite for me to come on this thing. In fairness, Darren said, well, I'm due on soon, so you don't have to do it just yet. But maybe this is a ploy between the two of you to get me on instead.
I mean, I don't like to say that Darren and I were working on this plan, but no, definitely. I wouldn't wish him sickness, but no, yeah. But
he's definitely, he's not one to shirk something like this. He loves a webinar and a podcast. So I did have an internal meeting with him earlier, and his voice is terrible. He had to whisper very quietly to avoid coughing. So yeah, anyone that was looking forward to seeing Darren speak today passes on his apologies, and you'll have to deal with me as a substitute.
No, I'm happy with that. So do you want to just give us a bit of background on you, Darren, Kieran? Look, I'm calling you Darren now because we're discussing Darren.
Yeah, I'll take the accolades of being a founder of a recruitment tech firm. But no, my background isn't as a techie as such, a developer, but I've got a long background of recruitment marketing, essentially. Starting my marketing career at a recruitment agency, moving on to 2 other agencies, in-house, various roles, kind of typical career progression path from a marketing assistant through to a head of marketing, building teams at recruitment companies. And then I worked for a period of time at a marketing agency for recruitment companies. And after that, I moved across to Pager. So very different. I now market a piece of technology back into the recruitment sector. So my experience is good for that. But the last year or so has been steep learning curve. Having to get technology as opposed to a service, it's definitely related. But yeah, definitely a new challenge, but one that's in familiar territory. I think you can't get out of it once you're in it, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, you're stuck for life now.
Yeah.
And so I put together a list of questions which I've kindly sent on to Kieran, and so those will be the sort of discussion topics. So if we talk about the first thing that I really wanted to run through, which is all around like resistance, because this is something that I hear all the time when I go in and speak with recruitment companies, or even with recruitment firm owners or anybody really, who's kind of taken that first step into kind of social media. And it is that hesitation to engage. And, you know, I think it's sometimes like a personal thing, sometimes it's a business thing. It's that fear of kind of putting yourself or out there. But can you think of like some really kind of compelling reasons why you think it is important, why you need to overcome those fears?
Yeah, I think social media is very broad, obviously, but I'm going to try and keep the focus on LinkedIn because I think it's the most applicable social channel or social network for people who will be watching this. I think there's a few sectors recruiters offer services into, which would be the exception, but in the main, LinkedIn is going to be a continually open tab on many people's browsers, so it seems apt to keep today's chat surrounding that. And I think the compelling reason for, I'll frame it as creating and publishing content. So we'll dig into that a bit deeper later, but the compelling reason to create and publish content for a recruiter, we're all going on LinkedIn anyway. And I think something like 1 billion users at last count when they last published stats of how many people are members or how many people have a profile on LinkedIn. But it's only something like 95% of people with an account on LinkedIn ever post any content. So ever get round to writing a post, posting a picture, posting a video. So when you think about the proportions there, just by creating content, you're going to be in the minority of users. So it's quite hard to get your head around that because every time you go on LinkedIn, you just see content, right? So you just assume that everyone in your network's creating content, and it's just not the case. So you only see people who are creating content that are either in your network or that the LinkedIn algorithm is deciding you will probably have an interest in. And then if you engage with that content, it will show you more of that same stuff. The other reason I'd say the compelling reason is you're going on there and you're sending connection requests. You're trying to build a network. There's no other reason to be going on there, really, is there? You want to build a network to, I'd say people go with the primary purpose to building a network of build a network so I can then search that network to find candidates or prospect clients.
Yeah.
My view is you should be going to primarily engage with that network. And you're not going to do that by just logging in, sending a connection request, and then searching and messaging that person in a month's time when you've got a role that might be applicable for them. So it's about shifting that perception of LinkedIn is a glorified candidate database to somewhere akin to going to networking events. But you can do that all day, every day from a laptop, from a mobile, and be continually planting seeds with that audience. So I think for me, that's reason enough. We're there anyway. So why would we not be doing that? I think good recruiters can still build a network without it, but just like in our personal lives, we don't have maybe some people do, but I don't have a weekly phone call with my parents like I would have done when I only had a landline. So the opportunity to network because of things like LinkedIn is there for the taking. So we can avoid using it and still be successful at our jobs, but it feels low-hanging fruit to me to actually invest a little bit of time in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, and we were talking about it just before we came on about how, if you think of like your databases and your CRM, your planning automations and your planning, kind of like how you're going to utilize that data that sits within there. And LinkedIn should almost be like that same kind of field that you're going, okay, right, exactly what you said. You've built this database, you've built this kind of connection with these people, and then how are you nurturing that? What are you taking and the lessons that you're taking from like what you're doing outside of that, and what are you putting into LinkedIn to kind of really grow and develop that network? Absolutely. And in terms of, and like I'm sure you've mentioned that you've built teams yourself in recruiters and worked in marketing. How have you overcome like that resistance piece of I don't have time or I don't have this? Are those compelling reasons enough just from your expertise or your experience? Is there any other tricks that you've tried to kind of get recruiters to kind of utilize it more as a tool?
I think, some of it's around the positioning. It's all well and good sitting here and going, loads of people are on LinkedIn, but no one's sharing content. That's a compelling reason, and it can help in your job. And the other one I mentioned, you're there anyway, so be a bit more proactive about the reason you're there. That doesn't overcome the resistance factors on its own, does it? So I always find it quite a funny paradox because, in my opinion, having worked with hundreds of recruiters over the years, they're the best people at being able to engage with other people on a one-to-one basis. You need charisma, you need people skills to be a good recruiter. You've got to have that ability to build relationships. But I think the resistance comes from the fact that it's not natural for them to put those same skills out in the open on a one-to-many platform. So the most confident person on the phone at being able to engage, negotiate, all those core skills we would associate with a successful recruiter. It's quite different to then put themselves out there. Find one-to-one, there's a lot less self-consciousness because you're having a chat with someone. If you say slightly the wrong thing, no one else is hearing it, so it's not a big deal. Versus, if I put that out on LinkedIn, everyone's seeing it. And for me, one of the biggest challenges, I kind of see a link, and hopefully no one takes offense by this, but recruiters probably tend to be more talkers than writers or creators. And I think there's probably a hang up from, I'm not very good at English, or my spelling and grammar's not great, or what if I use the wrong version of this word? I think when we're just talking in conversation, you don't have to be as conscious about things like your grammar. You might be conscious about your accent, perhaps, if someone doesn't understand it, but grammatical correctness isn't a thing that we're as conscious about on a call or even speaking right now. The thought of writing something probably strikes fear into some recruiters, just the same as someone asking me a mental arithmetic question on the spot. I'd be like, that rabbit in the headlights. So for me, that's a factor in it. The fact that you think, well, I'm not a good writer, so where do I even start? I think one of the things marketers or business leaders can do to overcome that is to encourage the recruiters from the basis that they're the experts, they're talking to people day in, day out, but couple that with opening up the opportunity and education around it's not just written content. We're on a video right now, and that's content. We're creating content. This will get recorded and put onto several platforms for people to watch in the future. Essentially, this is creating content. We're doing it right now. So recording videos, recording audio, creating visual things. Some recruiters might have a visual streak. They might be able to turn memes into something engaging for their industry. So I think that's one of the things that we can do to help more recruiters start to create and publish content is open their eyes to the stuff they're already seeing from other people, and don't kind of go down that one narrow lane of thinking, I've just got to write content, because then you won't get the barrier of the grammar thing. I think you touched on it. Time. Everyone's busy, right? A recruiter is probably the busiest of all kind of functions within a recruitment business, because everything relates to their success. Everyone within that business is only successful if recruiters are making placements. So creating content for something that a marketer will see as a long-term thing, and they will position it as building your personal brand is going to take time. Well, if it's not going to get a deal over the line today or this week, where does it stack up on that list of a very
Yeah.
busy person's list. So for me, that's another big barrier to try and overcome.
Yeah. And I think, well, I mean, things that I've found useful in the past when I'm trying to kind of sell into consultants or, you know, talk to them about that is to show them examples of other people who have built brands, personal brands in their niches, and talk to them about the success, but also give them a realistic timeline of like how long it's taken that person to get there, because it doesn't happen overnight. And like you said, it is about buying into that long-term thing, isn't it, of going, you know, this person's now doing this and they've achieved all of these things and they're being asked to go and talk on this webinar or this show or whatever it is. But if you rewind, they spent like a year in the beginning probably putting out content that nobody even saw. You know, fast forward 4 years, you can see the success. So I think it's really good to kind of showcase ideas like that. Sorry, I'm in my client's offices today, and it's like censored. So I'm obviously not moving around enough. Okay,
I can still see you quite well. I think we're okay. Save you jumping up and down every few minutes.
Yeah, thanks. And then I know we've talked about like personal branding and experts in like niche, because I think that is really key for recruiters, especially now that people are trying to move more to this kind of long-term relationship rather than like this old style of like kind of contingency. People want to build them repeat business. They want to kind of head more down that route. So I think personal branding and showcasing your expertise becomes even more imperative to that. So if I was a recruiter and, you know, I was thinking about like initial steps, what do you think would be some good, easy things initially that someone could do to kind of start to work on their social presence?
So it's a funny one to say as the starting point, because I would imagine many recruiters do this already, but start to find avenues and ways to stay up to date in what's going on in your sector. So if like Google Alerts is a really easy starting point. Set up some alerts on Google for news stories, articles, and blogs in and around your sector. So core sector, but then the periphery of it. And you might start out by getting news stories dropping in your inbox that are a little bit wide of the mark. But once you refine that over a period of days and weeks, you'll start to find that these are the most reputable news sources. These provide stories that I'm not getting from elsewhere. I'm not seeing on LinkedIn. Be wary of news stories that you see on LinkedIn, because you tend to be in a little bit of an echo chamber and only get stuff that you've clicked like on in the past from certain users. So as much as we're trying to establish a brand on LinkedIn, don't see LinkedIn as the source of all your research and knowledge. I really feel that approach, if you're not doing it already just as part of your day job without thinking about creating content, start doing that, because that's where you're going to get seeds of inspiration as to what to talk about. So let's face it, if you get a couple of news stories into your inbox in the morning that have been published yesterday, then the worst thing that's going to happen is you still don't post, you don't create any content, but you're a bit more informed and aware of what's going on. And then day 3 of doing that, you see an article that, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, or I'd never thought about that in that way. Would my network be interested in that? So there's an argument to say just directly sharing third-party content with your audience isn't particularly groundbreaking. But what I'd say as a starting point, it does give you that seed of something to create content about. I wouldn't just post a link to it with the headline and expect people to read into it. You've got to take your experience and your own personal knowledge from who you've been speaking to recently, what your clients are saying, and couple those things and put something together that's a post about the news, but with a bit of your own slant on it. So starting point, get your research process right. Make sure you're being informed of news. And like I said, Google Alerts are pretty easy to set up. So if you've got websites that you regularly go to, or you've just got certain phrases, key terms, who's being invested in, who's hiring, who's advertising jobs, get alerts coming to you to provoke thought around, well, I sense the market's shifting, or I sense there's opportunities for candidate movement because of redundancies here. If you're not getting that information now, then you've got to have that. But I'd say that's pretty standard for a lot of recruiters to have a finger on the pulse anyway. But yeah, if you're not doing that, get some feeds of information coming your way, and then that gives you the starting point rather than what else do you do? You sit there looking at LinkedIn with a blank expression thinking, where do I start?
Yeah, no. I genuinely think that that's how some people do think, you know, when they come to this, it is like, where do I even begin? And in terms of content ideas, I know we talked about like getting your research in place and definitely I think what you mentioned about like adding something to it. So adding some kind of value to that content. So not just kind of posting out that link of like, here's this latest news article. You know, and I've seen some really great ones where people do like shout outs. So if it's like a company that's had funding or something like that, that's always like a really good one to kind of see, where you then tag the companies and things like that. Because I think that's another key thing, isn't it? That you want to get that interaction as much as possible on that post that you're putting out to then encourage the LinkedIn algorithms to see you and showcase your stuff as you move forward. Are there any other kind of hacks that you've seen or used over the years to help you from a content perspective?
I think because I'm not a recruiter, but I have helped recruiters with this kind of process. It is like you should be doing this anyway, making notes on your calls or transcribing the notes with some technology or whatever it is. But note down commonalities. So if over a course of a week you hear the same thing more than 2 or 3 times from different people, then you probably don't realize it, but you might be the only person hearing that's in a position to actually make that information more publicly known. So much like with the feed of news stories of relevance, if you yourself are gleaning information from clients, from candidates, how's the market, what the opportunities, recruiters naturally investigating that. There's almost like a questioning element to being a recruiter, isn't there, where you dig a bit deeper. Have you had interviews anywhere else, trying to find out who else is hiring? Is anyone in other functions in your business hiring? You ask those questions naturally, but again, I don't think the natural inclination of a recruiter is then to move that to the other side as a seed of content creation. But it's the first sign of a trend, is some different people mentioning the same things suggests a trend. So if you're speaking to very similar people, you've probably got a really isolated access to people in similar roles. No one else is going out to the market saying, well, this week I've heard. So what have you heard? So what things have you heard regularly in your market? And why is that interesting? Because if it's interesting to you, you can guarantee it's interesting to other people. And the chances are it's people in that same industry. So yeah, definitely get in the habit. And again, this comes down to time. I get that. But get in the habit of anything you hear more than 2 or 3 times in quick succession on a phone call, that's got to be something worth making a note of. Have a little document somewhere, a post-it note, whatever it is, and just put down what it was. Don't detract from what your primary focus of that phone call is, but it's just always being mindful of, okay, that's interesting. I'll make a note of that, and can I then add to that with other information I find out? So I don't know whether that classes as a hack as such. But it's almost finding things you've already got coming your way and turning it into content.
100%. And, you know, I think a great thing to add to that as well is obviously just discuss it with your team. So if you and your team are working in a similar niche, you know, or even kind of within the business, there may be lots of different niches, but you might again start to see a trend, or it might trigger to somebody else in your sector. You know, and actually be a content idea generation. You're probably already having like your weekly, daily meetings, whatever it is. So just kind of put that almost onto the back of that and bring it in, that kind of content piece.
Totally agree. And if your team is already on this journey as such, it sounds quite cheesy that, but if you've got 1 or 2 people who are seeing success or have their own ways and means, share those stories. So we're good at sharing success within businesses about revenue, placements and stuff like that. But did you post something that got a lot of traction, a lot of engagement? I think some recruitment businesses are a bit fearful of repetition. And it's a point we make to a lot of clients and customers is you see repetition because you're connected to all your colleagues. All your colleagues have or should have very different networks on LinkedIn. So if they're sharing similar, if Joe Blogs has success and I see that success and I take his content or her content, even replicating it very similarly is not necessarily a negative.
Yeah.
It just puts a similar theme, and it's kind of proven. Joe Blogs, Jane Blogs, whoever has had success with that post. So
Yeah.
if you're in the same organization, it's not ripping it off if you just put your own spin or copy it relatively closely. And I think the pushback you often get from a recruitment business leader is, I'm just seeing the same thing from everyone all over LinkedIn. Yeah, you're seeing it because that's your network, and LinkedIn's
Yeah.
serving you up because you're constantly looking at your people's profiles. So the algorithm is constantly showing you more of the same of what you've
Yeah.
told it you're interested in. Remove that lens and think, actually, Jane Blogs, Joe Blogs, me, we've all got entirely different networks on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn won't show the same content over and over again to the same individual.
Yeah.
So remove that fear factor and don't worry too much about reusing, repurposing, and recycling content,
Yeah.
especially if someone in your team's seen success with it.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the head on the nail on the head there with that. Yeah, I couldn't get that words out then. But it is so true. Like I hear all the time from like recruiters, like, oh, I just see the same thing all the time, but they're all connected to other recruiters. So
Yeah.
There's a reason why people are doing similar type of content, because it works. So don't be afraid to as well recycle or repurpose other ideas from people in kind of a similar network, maybe not in the same sector, i.e. if you were in engineering and they're in engineering, I'm not saying copy that post, but if there's someone in tech and they're doing something and you think actually they've got loads of engagement on that post, you can test it and see if it works for you, see if it kind of brings some traction. The only other thing that I was thinking was around like reports, and we use these quite a lot when we're helping people with their socials, is like industry stats reports, kind of utilizing those. So if there's like governing bodies within your niche areas, those are really good ones to follow too, from a perspective of like new stats that come out, and then giving some kind of opinion on how that then affects the kind of talent market within your sector. I think that those are really good things. They show you really topical, really relevant to the industry, a bit of insight, which is, again, that adding value piece, isn't it? I think a good kind of hacks for content ideas, and even just some of the stats within it. Like people love a stat, don't they? Like if you're worried about,
right?
Yeah.
And so like, I suppose this is a hack or a tip as such, but what I tend to do is anything like that, you just screenshot the graph. You don't have to be a fancy creative to put your own graph together. If there's an industry white paper, sharing the link to the industry white paper is not going to get you that much engagement. But a key stat, 61% of X means Y, and you grab that as an image and post that on LinkedIn. Again, it's broken that back of the fear factor of, I can't articulate this well, or whatever it may be. Just blown away with that 61% of you guys are doing X. I would have considered it way less. That's quite a quick win. The algorithm will show images more than it would just plain text. And you're right. If there's content out there that you can curate. So again, just to repeat that point we made earlier, don't just share the link and that's that, because that's not adding value to anyone. But if you can articulate a point around why something's interesting, then that's going to inform a potential client or a candidate in your network that you're at least interested in their sector. When I've spoken to recruiters in the past, if they're not a marketing specialist or at first glance don't appear to properly understand marketing, and you feel like, well, if I deal with you, you've never done my job and you've never shown a vested interest in what my sector is, how can you get me the best role? Whereas if you're constantly saying to your network and your audience, I don't know whether that's on screen, by the way, I constantly have something in my hands.
only when you lifted it up.
I didn't realize how low the camera was. So it is a small Rubik's Cube because I can't do the 9x9 one yet. So I'm in training. It's something around that perspective of take the quick wins, but always add at least a little bit of value. Don't just post a link.
Yeah. I do like that is my one kind of pet peeve when I see people doing that. Okay, so in terms of, and you just touched on it then when you were talking about engaging with candidates, because LinkedIn can be used for either client or candidate attraction. So I feel like from a client perspective, if you're talking about like BD strategy, it's about being relevant, showcasing your niche and understanding of the brand. When it comes to attracting more candidates through your LinkedIn, have you seen any kind of good insights or good ways that people have kind of created more engagement with their candidates on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's a tough one, this, because it depends on the sector. So I'm going to give a typical "it depends" marketer's answer. I think if you're in a sector where your customer base can closely align, so a candidate that you place could become a client. They're in the same sector. So marketing's a really easy example. So if I'm placing a marketing manager, can that candidate then be my client because they're hiring a marketing exec or a marketing assistant? Then I think you should approach LinkedIn without a perspective of, I'm doing this for a client, I'm doing this for a candidate. If your sector falls into one where perhaps you can win clients on LinkedIn, but maybe not candidates, then you can set your stall out only speaking to that client basis. I think it will be rare where LinkedIn is going to serve you just candidates, but not clients. So I think you've kind of got one of two things. You've got that treat everyone as in they're a customer and they're interested in this sector. So the things I go about creating, I don't have to be polarizing. I just have to tread a line down the middle and think, is this informative to one or both? And more often than not, it will be both. I think if you were just looking at LinkedIn from a candidate attraction perspective, or how do I find a candidate for the job I'm working today, I think that's probably too late in the day when it comes to this longer term strategy.
Yeah.
I think what you want to be doing is building a network of people rather than candidates or clients that could become either. So don't open up LinkedIn and suddenly think, I'm going to put some content out today that'll attract a candidate. You can put a job ad on LinkedIn and attract a candidate today.
Yeah.
But in order for that to be seen by many of your network, you've already got to have made that network work for you. So build that network out. So I would see it as that, make it the case that people start to trust you and think about you as a trusted person within that sector. Don't think about candidate and client. Think about, am I trusted by people in the sector? And then if Dave needs a new job, he might just drop you a message thinking, you know what you're talking about. Can you help me get out of this job I don't like? And vice versa. I really need to hire a new team because we just got funding and a budget signed off. I'm going to come to you and say, can you hire me 3 people? I think having that outlook is more important than thinking about, how do I go and find candidates quickly on LinkedIn? It's not to burst a bubble, but you've got sources of searching and finding candidates there and then. I wouldn't try and pigeonhole that into your LinkedIn approach.
Yeah, no, that's good. And in terms of, and I know we've sort of talked about this broadly, but obviously community building is key. So it's building that to a point where people know, like, and trust you and understand you. How important would you say things like LinkedIn groups are, for instance? Would you say that that's something that people should invest their time in? Should they be kind of promoting themselves within that, like joining and contributing to the conversations within these groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think because you've got functionality like groups on LinkedIn, and then if you think about in similar scenarios where you can utilize technology for building a network or a closed network, let's put it that way. So if LinkedIn's an open network, let's describe this approach as a closed network. Whether you use a LinkedIn group, whether you use a WhatsApp group, whether you invest in specific community platforms to run this, I would say it's only going to be worthwhile if you can facilitate it on the long term. So speaking firsthand, I'm involved in a recruitment marketing community that I'm part of a team that try and help keep the momentum behind it. It's heavily based around a WhatsApp group, and that works well from the perspective of it's on everyone's phone. They can ask questions, they can get answers. what I would say, it's a highly engaged group, but it's still really difficult to nurture and maintain. So lots of it is self-fulfilling. There's people in there that ask questions and get answers, but you notice over time, if you're not what's the phrase, fostering or nurturing content within there, or putting the occasional poll, who uses what website platform, who uses what for email, can anyone recommend a marketing agency to help me? I'll just get you a slide put in there. You've got that. You've got to have something put in there by the people that run the community as well. So think about the scale and think about the resource you've got. If you're struggling to facilitate content creation for yourself and your LinkedIn profile, and you're just starting out, I would avoid anything like thinking about starting a community or a group. I think if you get to the point where, if you're in a specific industry or niche, what I would advise first is look for existing communities and look to start to contribute to those, because if someone's invented that community, it's then really hard to be a challenger to it and give people a reason to either also join yours or leave the other one to join yours. So it doesn't really matter on the medium, whether it's a LinkedIn group or a WhatsApp group or even a Slack channel that you invite people to. Just be wary. If something already exists, you're going to struggle to get as much uptake. If you do spot a gap and think, all right, there isn't a community for this, we're going to build one, think about resourcing it, get more than one person to try and run it and contribute to it, and try and identify, like, I guess, some champions who you could sit within that community that you know are going to be quite vocal. So I think it's a tough nut to crack. The value can be really rewarding, but again, like a lot of marketing things, it's a slow burn.
Yeah, I think that community piece is huge. And I've seen, certainly over the last 2 years, lots of recruiters start these groups. Some have gone on to phenomenal success and now have full-time community managers that work within their business whose role is solely to do that, and they do kind of in-person events and things. Others where they might have started like a women in group, and that person's left, and then there's not been that person to step in, or you're trying to give that functionality to somebody that it doesn't sit correctly within the business as well, and trying to pigeonhole, and it can be a real pull on resource and time.
So it's really easy to start them, isn't it? It's really easy just to create things and then have all the gusto in the world about the first few weeks, but it can tail off, and then it just looks stale. And what impression does that then give to the people that joined it?
Yeah. And I think that kind of same sentiment goes across all of this, doesn't it? Like that thing of like being really practical about how much resource you actually have to give to this. So, there is a tendency that people, I don't want to say get carried away, but, they'll have lots of enthusiasm at the beginning. So they'll start posting on social media, and they'll post 3 times a day, and then they'll set up a group, and then they'll do this, and, and then if you fast forwarded 6 months, they're probably posting once a month, or, so, if you start by kind of taking bite-sized chunks and you give yourself a realistic amount of time that you can put to this each day, each week, whatever it is, then it becomes more manageable, doesn't it? Because, we keep saying it, but it really is a long-term goal of building your brand and building your niche and building that kind of element of trust. It isn't going to happen overnight. So if you think that you're going to be able to spend a day a week on creating social content, it just isn't realistic unless you are a social media person working in that business. If you're a recruiter, it's just not going to happen. And so you're setting yourself up for a fail.
Key, isn't it? You've got to have your eyes open to both of those things. How much time am I willing to wait to be able to measure this? So sometimes it's not about how long will it take to generate revenue or a return on investment. It's how long am I willing to wait to start to see green shoots and things that encourage me to do this more. My rule of thumb is, if you've never really proactively created and published content and built a network around that content, and I'll just clarify what I mean by that. So many people on LinkedIn are connected to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that they've ever worked with, and their network is really diluted. So if you're going to post content to LinkedIn takes a proportion of your existing network, so all of your connections, and it shows them to a small proportion of them at random. and then it decides how engaging that piece of content is. So if you've got Steve, who was in your lectures at uni, and you've got Dave you work with in your first ever job, and then you've got the process engineers that you actually want to engage with your content, it might be Steve and Dave that are LinkedIn's test case. So if they're the ones shown the content about process engineering or the trends in that industry, they're not going to engage with it. Then no one else in your network gets shown it. So it's not just about the content you create, it's about being quite strategic and specific with who's in your network. If you just add anyone and everyone, then LinkedIn's kind of sandbox area of who it shows it to is vastly diluted in terms of who you want that content to go on and be shown to. So I think there's a lot to be said about being quite niche with who you add as connections. We tend to proactively go after people who we want to be connected to, but reactively when we get connection requests, or think back to when we didn't use LinkedIn for this purpose, we've probably got networks of people that my advice would be to cull a lot of it.
I was literally I just wrote down cull, and that was going to be my question. How often do you think you should? How often, when was the last time you culled?
It's probably 3 months or so ago where I've thought, do you know what, there's probably a load of junk here from previous roles or jobs when I'm, the audience I want to see the content is now very different. Prime example being in a previous role, I would want recruitment leaders, founders of recruitment businesses seeing my content to get a lead. My current role is more important for me for building a community of marketers, that my network is marketers at recruitment companies, not owners of recruitment businesses. I've probably got both. So when I put marketing content out, actually the marketers engage with it more, but if LinkedIn shows it to a lot of the leaders first and they don't engage with it, that's diminishing the chances of that being seen by more marketers. So I think I've lost train of thought on the initial question.
I just wanted to clarify. We were talking about the communities and kind of building on that, and like how important it was that your network that you're serving the content to is the right people.
Yeah, that's it. Because you could start to, the time it takes to actually start to see some results. So if your network's crap, it's going to take longer because you never get that traction. So do have a little bit of an audit and think, are these, if these people were the people that LinkedIn used to test my content, would these people engage with it? Is there a cat in hell's chance? Because if not, get them out of your network, because they're not going to help propel your content. If you've got a solid network of people and then show them content, straight off the bat, you know whether some people are engaging with that content. Are they liking it? Are they commenting on it? Don't be too put off in the early stages if they don't, and don't see that as failure, because you need to try a few different things, whether that's different types of content when it comes to written, visual, video. But going back to your point, my rule of thumb, I've got there eventually, is don't enter into this process without, we've got lights. Don't enter into it without having 3 months, genuinely 3 months minimum, quarter, where I would say you need to be posting 3 times a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 3 months. That would be, if you're not prepared to do that, I'd probably knock it on the head now. Keep doing what you're doing elsewhere to generate revenue, because if you don't at least put that in, you won't create enough content to know what will work, and you won't give it enough time for anyone realistically to get to the point where they trust you and say, can you help me fill this job, or can you find me a job?
And I'm going to come back to that point because I do want to touch on it. But just one question that's kind of come into my mind that I get asked a lot, and I'd be really interested to hear your opinion on, is just how much of yourself should you show? As in, how much do you think you should?
How personal should personal brand be?
I probably could have phrased it a bit more like that, not how much of yourself should you show. But I think
that's the irony, isn't it? I think that's what puts a lot of people off, is the word personal. So personal to us, we immediately jump to thinking personal life. So personal brand, personal life. I think we've got to try and dispel that and think, actually, how much of my personal life or things about me as a person am I willing to put into this and willing to share with people? And I think that's a gut comfort thing. I think people know in their gut whether they want people in their professional life to know that about them or don't know that about them. And what I would say is, don't let the personal thing put you off investing in creating and publishing content to build a network on LinkedIn. Because nowhere does it say you have to share a photo of you in Lycra or up a mountain or a picture of your dog.
Why were you
There's
in
no
Lycra
rule.
up a mountain, Kieran?
I weren't, but lots of men of my age don Lycra and cycle up mountains, and I
This
think
is
it's
very
weird.
true.
I also have a dog and I take photos of it. So on the flip side, I'm guilty of that one. No offense to any cyclists out there. I just can't bring myself to put that Lycra on. But that's the point. If you want to show that because that's part of your all-round
Personal
persona
brand.
and you
Yeah.
do things for charity, or you want to put that impression across, or you think, do you know what, in my network there might be a lot of cyclists that I have this in common with, and sharing this adds value to that network because it will bring like-minded people together, then I'm all for it. Go for it. Share more
Yeah.
personal things, but don't think you have to.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it if you never tell anyone whether you're married, not married, whether you've got kids or you don't. Nothing about that is something you have to do. You
And I
can
think that that is
share.
a fear amongst people, though, as well. You know, we talked earlier
Yeah,
about like fears that people have because, you know, I see things where people have massively overshared, and then I see things where there's no kind of personality, and so it, like you said, it's finding that bit where you're comfortable at as to what you kind of put out and how much
yeah,
you share. Yeah.
yeah. I try and strike a balance as such between being professional but also being. I wouldn't say I'm certainly not an extrovert, but on LinkedIn I don't mind sharing a bit around the edges. And what I mean by that
Yeah.
is, if you're going to work with me or I'm going to come on your podcast, hopefully you'll know a little bit about what type of person I am. But that helps with the kind of role I do as a marketer.
Yeah.
It helps people like yourself think, oh, he might be interesting to talk to because I've put a little bit more personality and personal things out there. In your
Yeah.
sector, if you're not comfortable with that, you can still have a personal brand without sharing your personal life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm just a bit conscious of time, so but I really want to come back to that kind of measuring piece just before we kind of bring it to a close. So we talked about that you'd say a minimum of 3 months, which I
Yeah,
think is spot on. You know, we always say to people, you've got to give it a good period. 12 weeks is a nice period. You can plan, and
yeah,
there are tools that people can use as well to help them in terms of like scheduling things. So,
yeah,
you know, you don't always have to Monday, Wednesday, Friday, do it then. You could put some
yeah.
content together at the beginning of the week. You know, there's ways around it to help people be more efficient with their time and ideas of how they can do it. And what would you say are the key things that they should be looking for in terms of measurement?
So again, when you're just starting out, you don't have to overcomplicate this. LinkedIn itself, if you go on your own profile, it gives you a little bit of analytics stuff. So let's take the baseline example of someone who's never shared or never posted content. If you suddenly start posting content, and I'm saying 3 times a week, but build yourself up, do once and then do twice, then do 3 times over a 3-week period, and then maintain 3 times. Chip away at that, but then have a look at that data that LinkedIn gives you on your profile. So it'll tell you how many profile viewers you've had, and then you can backdate that and see, well, is that different than last week? And then you can dig into a little bit of the demographics. So of those profile views, are they the people that I could work with or the people that I place? For me, straight away, you will be encouraged because you'll go, wow, 10, even if it's 10 more people looked at my profile this week. And when I
Yeah.
look at the demographics, they're all from engineering companies. So straight away that becomes self-fulfilling, doesn't it? You think, right, how can I increase that more? So yeah, my advice is look into them really basic stats. So how many people are viewing your profile? How many times have you appeared in search results? So that's basically other people searching for people on LinkedIn. How many times were you in the search results? And then impressions and engagement on the actual content posts. So take some of that with a pinch of salt. And the meaning of that is over time looking at, did I get more impressions this month on content than last month? That's worthwhile. But don't be
Yeah.
too downhearted if you don't get all that many impressions to start with. And always remember that as a recruiter, not everyone who sees your content and derives value from it is going to actually give it a thumbs up or a love heart or whatever, because some people won't want to advertise that they're in touch with a recruiter or considering looking for jobs. So just because the post doesn't get a like or a comment doesn't mean it hasn't added value. So use metrics available as a steer, but don't like pin all your hopes on it. Ultimately, after 3 months, what you want to pin your hopes on is someone messaging you and saying, can you help me with this job? If there's no other way that they've found out about you other than your proactive content publishing, then you can put that down in the column of wins, can't you? But use the like reactive metrics as a steer, and then when you look back after a month and 3 months, you want to be looking at actual revenue generating opportunities. The metrics that give you is this worthwhile over the long term?
And there will be kind of indicators as you go. Like one thing that I always hear, or people will say to me, oh, I've been getting like a lot of comments when we're speaking to customers. Oh, I've noticed you're a lot more active on socials lately. And you think that that's like, again, a real positive, that you're doing something right, that it's getting through, the algorithms are working, they're seeing more of your stuff, it's going to the right people. So, it can be stuff like that. Exactly like you said, it doesn't always need a like or a comment, because, people are nervous. And especially like people like that fear of putting yourself out there in the first place. People have a fear of commenting on a lot of stuff, or, putting themselves out there by making kind of showing an opinion to something. Some
that's
people
a tricky
really
one,
like
isn't
to
it?
fly under the radar. And you've got to think about like your sector too, are they, like there's that kind of real sweet spot, isn't there, of like what I'd call watchers, like men aged between like 40 and 55 that don't hardly ever comment on anything, and it's
I've just fallen into that category last week. 14. Am I now a watcher? I promise not to be. But I know what you mean. There are.
But they consume all the media. Like Twitter. They love Twitter. They'll use it as a news feed.
Never post.
No, never post anything. So it's about understand. So it's just about understanding who your customers are as to how they're most likely to react to the stuff that you're putting out. And so, I think the key thing is that not everybody's metrics are going to be the same, are they? So, just because one person has success and it shows through comments doesn't mean that you're failing if you don't get them same comments.
And that's the reason behind setting that time frame out and doing it for 3 months, because there's no doubt that in some sectors, some people will already have an established network. They might have a shared content, but the network might be there. You're not comparing apples with apples. I could do the same content as you, but your network reacts better to it faster. If you get 1 million views over 3 months and I get 10,000, I might still generate as much revenue from one person that came back to me about one post. So don't be too self-conscious if you see someone on LinkedIn saying, I started a personal brand journey last year and I've had over 1 million viewers. Like, your sector might mean 100 viewers is exceptional because they're a specialist. It's a specialist scientific niche or something, and there's only 100 of them in the world. Then, take that into account when you're looking at data and statistics.
You just reminded me, we had James Burt on, like the podcast guy, and he was saying this, we were talking about customers again, and he was saying that he does one podcast and it's to like some real obscure mining thing that's like, there's only sort of like 80 people in the world that can do this thing, and this podcast has got like 70 subscribers or something. It was something like along those lines, and you're like, wow. You would think, oh, that's not a success, but it's because they understood who their market was.
Huge. Take it into, everything's got to have that level of relevance, hasn't it? And you've got to take it within context. So think about it from your journey. What does it matter in your industry, in your sector?
Yeah, definitely. I'm just conscious of time because I like to try and finish because I think people sort of jump into this on their lunch. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. We have got one question in the Q&A, but if anybody else wants to add anything just quickly before we do dive into it, just dates for the next podcast is going to be, here we go, the 7th of July, and it is around data intelligence. So there'll be more details to follow. Myself and Kieran are both offering the same kind of similar thing. Mine is if that anybody wants to book a one-to-one just to talk about their marketing, then there'll be a link sent round. And Kieran, I know, sorry, I don't think I've even said that you work at Pager. I've just realised.
Yeah, we did. We talked about Darren at the start. So I lead the marketing function at a recruitment technology platform called Pager. If any of you are watching and want to find out more information, have a demo of the product. If you put that you heard me on this webinar in the field on the form where you book a demo and you go through to buy the product, we'll give you a 10% discount off the first year. Do we want to answer this question from Johnny?
Yes.
Have we got time?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's about Pager. Reference that you saw me speak on this webinar in your demo request form. And if you do go on to buy, we'll give you 10% discount. So Johnny's question, this is a really interesting one because it's something that we talk about a lot. Ironically, because Darren's failed to appear on this webinar. But part of my job is helping Darren position himself as a thought leader amongst CEOs. So Darren gets way more traction speaking to other recruitment CEOs, so probably got more success off this webinar if it was him. But because he's a business leader, business leaders respect his values, his opinions. I'm a marketer. I don't really know about running a business. I know how to run a marketing function. So I think, Johnny, your question hinges around that. How do we help them people who do have that subject matter expertise, that experience? I think you've got to work with them. You've got to take a lot of the fear out of the equation that we kind of discussed on this webinar. And I think there's no harm in giving them a leg up. So write some content with them, let them review it first. If they start to get happy with you, and I say go back to what I said earlier, it doesn't have to be written. Create some content for them. If they're happy with what you've done and they publish it and get some success, it's very much like what we discussed earlier, start to monitor that same traffic. I see it as a key role as a marketer within a business, not just in recruitment, that the marketing team needs to empower other people to build personal brands, and leadership are going to have voices that get listened to. Ironically, they will be the most shy people when it comes to posting on LinkedIn. They'll be the most self-conscious people about it. I'm quite lucky. Darren will have a go. Darren does it himself a lot. I'm not saying I write his content for him, but we do actively talk about it and plan it and think about what he should be publishing on LinkedIn. He's not just left to his own devices on that. I think you're asking, is it worth it? Definitely worth trying. Don't feel like you have to just make everyone willing to do it themselves. Feel free to help them out.
Yeah, I think that is the same in the experience that I've had in most recruiters, that I tend to find there is probably a bit of resistance, and it is down to that fear factor, and it is just kind of helping them as much as possible, or finding bits that they are comfortable, like we've introduced things like a little bit like what we're doing now, but like interview series, or getting them onto podcasts, or getting them more involved in kind of that higher level discussions, and that's worked really well in the past with some of the recruiters that we've worked with. Right, it is 2 o'clock. I'm so sorry because I feel like I could keep chewing your ear off, Kieran, for ages. But thank you so much for coming on and doing this with me. I hope Darren's feeling better. And I'm glad.
I hope so too, because I'll have to sub in for him tomorrow as well if he's not.
I'm really glad that our plan worked out, Darren.
The plan. You got me eventually.
It's
been a pleasure. I should have come on sooner. I do apologise. If anyone has further questions, though, feel free to message me and Katie. I'm sure you can find us on LinkedIn.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Kieran.
Cool.
Have a great day. Thanks, guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.